Welcome to the Liz McMullen Show. This is episode 79, and I'm welcoming prolific author and teacher Ellen Hart. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be here.
Yay! So I want to start out. The book that I read for this episode is The Old, Deep, and Dark. What attracts you to writing mystery?
Oh boy. Well, gosh, I think I'd always loved reading mysteries. When I was a kid, read all the Nancy Drew books, and my parents gave me the entire Sherlock Holmes canon when I was a kid, and I have a bad memory, so I can read those stories over and over and over. I never remember who did what to whom, but I love the quality of mystery. I think it's what keeps us reading pretty much any book, any novel, and that's basically what's going to happen next, and a secret that you want to understand, and that sort of thing. So I think it's one of the reasons why mysteries remain so popular. For me, about 1987, I had always wanted to write. I put it off because I was working, we had kids, et cetera. But I figured if I didn't get to it, if I didn't at least try and write a book, that I'd get to the end of my life and have this huge regret. And I try not to live that way. So I was looking around for what to write, and a friend of mine who was a professor of Scandinavian Studies at the University of Minnesota had written a mystery, and he gave me a copy of it. And I thought, well, maybe a mystery. And a couple of other things happened that year. One is there was a local writer named Kate Green who had written a book that I just thought was phenomenal, a mystery. And and then someone gave me a copy of Sisters of the Road and Murder in the Collective by Barbara Wilson, which those were, I think, two of the earliest lesbian mysteries that were written. And in a way, I think those books gave me permission not to write myself out of my mystery. That was huge. Probably the most formative, though, was back in the 80s, the P.D. James mysteries. Do you know who P.D. James is?
No.
She's an English mystery writer. She's won everything there is to win. She's a huge name. She's a dame now. They were making some of her mysteries into mystery series on the BBC, and they were showing them in America. And in this one series, they would interview her for a few minutes after each of the programs. And I remember one night they said to her, they asked her the same question. You're a good writer. You could have written pretty much anything you wanted. Why mysteries? And she said, I thought a mystery's simple. I'll use it to help me understand how to construct a novel, and then I'll move on to the real thing, which for her was literary fiction. But she said, I realized right away that there was nothing that I wanted to do that I couldn't do within the context of a mystery. And besides, a mystery is essentially a novel about good and evil. I have a degree in theology, and boy, that appealed to me. And I just thought, yeah, it's got to be a mystery.
You and I have, it's a little bit in common. When I was in college, my major was political theory, but my minor was ancient Greek and Roman mythology, religion. Mythology, religion, politics. And so I find that stuff utterly fascinating.
Where did you go to school?
I went to Mount Holyoke.
Okay, all right.
And
wow. That all sounds fascinating.
I loved it. I studied at Trinity in Dublin, and my excuse was that we didn't have as many classes on mythology, so I wanted to go there, which was great fun. There's one thing that I wanted to mention. When I started reading The Old, Deep, and Dark, I believe it's the prologue, though it was not labeled that way. The way it was written, it kind of reminded me of Holden Caulfield.
Oh, my.
And the reason why I say that, well, it's not phony this, phony that. But
I don't think I even used the word phony.
No, but the feeling was that, these adults don't take me seriously, but
Yeah.
I know what I want and I know who I am. And you know, he has this very brave moment before the wisp of smoke, so to speak. And I was like, that really reminds me of Catcher in the Rye, that kind of countercultural thing.
Oh, interesting. No one's ever said that. I like that very much.
Yay!
Being compared to the greats, yeah. I mean, that book was a very formative book for me. I certainly remember reading it, and then I remember actually reading Catcher in the Rye years later, and not liking it quite as much. Maybe a book for a time in your life. I don't know.
You know, and not that it was one of my favorites, but it was one of those things in English classes. But I had a similar experience in that when I read Lord of the Rings in high school, I adored it. I got so much out of it. I loved Aragorn. Like, I loved how he was a leader and how subtle he was, and that people would do things for the love of Aragorn, you know, go into the dark and deep for him and with him. And so I loved it. And then I read it about 7 years ago and I did not love it.
Yeah, maybe in some ways you can't go home again with your reading.
I know, that's Tom Wolfe, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I remember that one. You know, that concept is a very deep concept, and it actually, the anthology that I just published, Appetites, my story really is about you can't go home again. And even though it's an erotic anthology, that's so not the point of it. The point of it was, you know, this character was experiencing a great deal of pain and a great deal of loss. And there was a life-changing event before the story started that meant that she could never go home again. Even if she went home, that home doesn't exist anymore. So that concept has kind of stuck with me as I've grown up.
Yeah. It has a lot of resonance, I think, for everybody, because you end up, you know, I remember literally going home again after being in college, and everything looked so small. Nothing was the same.
Absolutely. And, you know, everything is about perspective. You know, one thing that I did not expect, because the reason why I started writing myself is that I was treating this young boy who had galactic writer's block. I mean, he could stare at a blank page like nobody's business. And I had to practically go all Olympian trying to figure out ways to prime the pump and get him writing. And in the process, I was like, well, maybe I can write too. And so I started doing that. And because I'm a teacherly mind, I went to Barnes & Noble and sat on the floor in front of the instructional books on writing. And I opened them and read pages from them. But one thing that really surprised me is I never thought of Stephen King as a teacher of writing.
But you read his book, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I was so surprised. And shame on me.
Yeah. I have asked many writers, big name writers, have they ever read a book that actually helped them, that helped them over a block or something that they were experiencing? And every one of them said the best book. Every one of them, to a person, said the best book I've ever read on writing is On Writing by Stephen King.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love it because it chronicles what life was like for even, he's such a successful novelist.
Yeah.
And so creative, and yet he papered his walls with rejection notices from the time that he was a teenager, and that makes
he threw Harry away. He threw it in the garbage.
I know.
Out.
And it makes him human, and I think that that's important. And another thing that I hold on to, and it actually is not related to writing, but it translates to, I was just starting college, and I was intimidated by the high volume of reading I was expected to do on a weekly basis, and I was just traumatized. And one of my dorm mates said to me, "You know this, each book gets read one page at a time, and the same is true for writing." And that just opened my world and made it less intimidating.
Yeah, it's brick by brick. Yeah. That's exactly right. I really love reading books about writers. I read a biography. I'm not a fan of Jack London, but I read a biography of him, and that was fascinating. I have never been able to penetrate anything by what's the name of the guy? He hanged himself. John Foster Wallace. What's his name? David Foster Wallace. He wrote this tome that is, I mean, even his essays. I love to hear him talk. But there was a book, a biography of his that came out last year that I read, or 2 years ago that I read. It's called Every Love Story is a Ghost Story, and it was about his life and the struggles he had writing and the struggles he had with depression and mental illness, and it's just you have this idea about who writers are, and I don't know. Writers are people with struggles, and we all struggle with self-doubt and all of that stuff, and it's just so interesting to read about writers.
Yeah, there's this one biography that I read on Isaiah Berlin, who is a political theorist, and I think he was a Don in Oxford. I can't remember correctly. But I find biographies utterly fascinating, especially when they're not driven for fame, like the ones that are written or ghostwritten for politicians. But I love seeing the ordinary everyday life, and I think I find that attractive as a reader in fiction as well.
I'll just mention Robert Caro, who is Lyndon Johnson's biographer. He's got like a 16-volume thing on Lyndon Johnson, and the man himself was a horror show, but it was, and he still has 1 volume left to do, but it was one of the most fascinating biographies I have ever read, because it was the history of a time, and it was, I learned so much. I love history and I love biography. Just eat it up.
Do you ever do historical fiction?
I never have. No. Have you?
Do you know what? I find it intimidating to write historical fiction. I love history, and I love reading historical fiction, and I watch documentaries, and I travel, and all that kind of stuff. But for me, like, some people find mysteries and whatnot intimidating because of how they need to be crafted, and I love them. I like writing them. The sequel to my first novel is really going to be a mystery. But with historicals, you have to get the time period. You need to get the cadence of the speakers, and I don't know if I can do it.
It's a ton of research. I had a friend who wrote a book about 1919, and I don't know how many years he did research. He could have told you what he did every day, or what was done every day, what the headline was every day in 1919. And frankly, the book was not. He included too much that was not relevant to the actual through line of the story, and it ended up being kind of a mishmash. But it is intimidating to me too. I totally agree, and I understand people who might be intimidated by mysteries because there is a very specific structure. It's big, it's wide open, but there is an architecture to a mystery. So
yeah, there's foreshadowing, there's red herrings, misdirection, and keeping it going. And when Linda K. Silva was talking about my novel, she said she never lets you rest. And that's the point.
You like that?
That's the point. That was the most gorgeous compliment ever, because it's just one thing after the other, not to be fantastical, but there you find yourself panting.
It's what every story wants. You want to have that pace, yeah.
Absolutely. So you have a quote in the beginning of The Old Dark and Deep, and I always find those fascinating when people include them either before a chapter or before a book. And I'm going to read it. It's Stephen King. Monsters are real, and ghosts are real too. They live inside us, and sometimes they win. Oh my God, what a punchline, huh?
Yeah, isn't that a quote? When I saw that, I thought, oh my, I'm going to find a use for that somewhere.
And sometimes they win. And, in true crime shows and whatnot, you find out that often the murderer is not as other as we would hope they would be.
That's the point. We like, boy, I couldn't agree more. We like to distance ourselves from what we think of as an insane act, or, and you know what? We're not that distant.
No, it's easy to think of the boogeyman or the sincerely mentally disturbed folks who are serial killers and whatnot, like Dahmer and whatnot. But there are a million shows now, even a network dedicated to, it's called ID, and they're dedicated all to these, almost everyday crimes, like, crimes of passion, scandals and, greed and infidelity, and it's this play that people want to watch over and over again, whether they want to admit to it, and even things like Law and Order. Dun, dun.
That's right. No, I watch ID too, and I watch Dateline, and I read a lot of true crime. I love true crime, and I'll tell you, one of the reasons I think we are drawn to the mystery is because, and I think this is what keeps mysteries relevant, is that they're social documents. They're set in a certain time, and most of the time they're, that we write about the time we live in. But they're also they're kind of modern morality plays. I think the social novel has kind of devolved into the mystery. Most importantly, though, I think the mystery is, oh gosh, there's so many things to say about it. I think the
Well, I just was thinking, because you're talking about a play, it reminds me of the ancient Greeks and their amphitheaters and their plays, and like Antigone and all these different representations of, oh my goodness, this is so foreign, this is so other, but at the same time, what attracts people is the sameness and the things that they can actually identify with, whether they... Go ahead.
Exactly, and the fact that I think you've got, you can make a case that mysteries today have moved from the whodunit, which is still relevant, but we have moved somewhat over to the whydunit, because it is so important for us to understand the why of that kind of act. What would motivate people? Motivation is, I think, truly central to the modern mystery.
Mm-hmm. I see that, and then after a certain point, because I had saturated myself over, now I realize, decades with these different shows, I got to the point where I was like, no more murder, please. And and then what I ended up doing, which is, I think is an interesting switch. I'm not handy. I don't pick up tools and make things, but I love watching home improvement shows, especially those that are themed for either rehabbing a property, or I love the ones where people come in and fix the wrongs of a previous contractor.
My partner loves those. We have two things taped on our DVR. We have all the dastardly mystery-related crap I listen to, and then all of the home improvements,
like Rescue My Renovation and Holmes Makes It Right and Rehab Addict, but I also enjoy Discovery as well. So I've gotten into watching American Pickers.
Never watched that.
They go around either welcomed or what they call freestyling, and they go into people's properties and rescue what they call rusty gold. And it could be signs, memorabilia, antiques, and the unusual, also handicrafts and stuff like that. And what I love about it is that they find it in these dark or overpopulated areas and bring it to life, and either share it with a person who would bring it into their home, or in some cases into museums. And that's why I like American Restoration, because not only do they fix stuff, they bring it back to life. And so for about a year and a half, I've been focusing on rediscovering, rebuilding, and fixing things.
Sure, no, that's great.
It's so funny because for so long I was mystery girl. I love the John Sanford books, the Prey series.
Sure.
And I also liked the Legal Eagle kind of stuff, and all the different legal novels,
Scott
sometimes
Pearl.
mysteries. Yeah, I like that kind of stuff too. So I still like the whodunits. I still can get into the murder mystery stuff, but I also needed a break from it. I think that there needs to be kind of like some breathing space.
Yeah, no, I understand. I probably read half novels now and half nonfiction. And the one thing that they have to have in common is that they both have to be a good story, or I put it down. But yeah, I can't read just one thing.
Do you only write mystery?
Yes, yep, that's all I've ever written. I have a number of other books. They would all probably still have an element of mystery in them, that I started writing. Part of the problem is I teach full time, and I also I have contracts. I have a book a year that I have to write. There are many years that I wrote more than a book a year, and with everything else going on in my life, that's as much as I can do. I can't write 2 books at a time. I know there are people who do it. I simply can't. So, and because I've had contracts for 25 years, and the contracts are for mysteries. That's what I've done.
One of the things that I enjoy about your writing is how fully formed I get these unusual, quirky characters, and you're able to capture in just a few paragraphs what makes them so unusual, and little ticks or aspects of a person, whether they like the Gilded Age, which is very interesting time in history. And the reason why it's called the Gilded Age and not the Golden Age is because just under the surface is the not so wonderful.
That's so pretty. Yeah, that's right.
So I thought, what a perfect way to describe this ostentatious character who likes the theater and all of its glory and its intimations and her gaudy jewelry and all the ways that it's very satisfying to her. And, I really liked that interweaving. And I think your love of history will obviously pops up in your writing with the way that you approach presenting characters.
Good. I hope so. A little bit. Yeah.
It's very rich language, and I love when writing is so darn meaty. There's a lot going on, and one of the helpers that you gave, and I don't know if you do this for all books, but you gave almost like how a play has an explanation of who the characters are.
Cast of characters.
Yeah, cast of characters, and you had, a similar thing at the beginning of the book. And I find that helpful because if you're going to have a rich cast of characters in your book, as a reader, that can be very strenuous to hold it all in your head.
I agree. And actually that came from my love of P.D. James. Her first couple of books, every writer wants a reader to come to a book, and they want that reader to read it until they get done with it. But that's not the way we read. We pick it up, we put it down, we pick it up, we put it down. And if there's time in between, you forget who these people are. And I had difficulty with P.D. James characters, so I would write them down in the back of the book, who they were. Then I came across, Niall Marsh? She's a Golden Age mystery writer, English mystery writer. She was from Australia, and then she lived most of her life in England. She used the cast of characters, and I thought, well, I'll just borrow that.
Yeah, Sandra DeHelen did the same thing with one of her books. She has this series where she reimagines Sherlock Holmes as 2 women.
Oh,
yes,
interesting.
Which is kind of fun. There's so much to do within a genre because mystery. They're not all one shade. They're all different kinds. Like Jessie Chandler cracks me up. Like her.
Yeah.
Oh my God, she writes the most hilarious mysteries.
Have you ever heard her read?
Yes.
She cracks herself up.
I know. And it's so fantastic because she's one of those mystery writers that, keeps on throwing trouble at her characters like
Oh, yeah.
nobody's business. But it's so funny. Like this, grandmother like character with her purple shoes is like the most important thing. And, with her little Louisville slugger, her little whomper that she brings with her.
Yeah. No, I love Jessie's books. She's a dear friend, and yeah, I am so glad that she's doing well.
Oh my goodness. And I love them because they're so entertaining, and the humor kind of alleviates the intense stress of so much trouble being thrown
They're
at
getting a little
authors.
darker. Each book has gotten a little darker.
I
And
didn't.
mystery novelists, I think, I often have people comment on that, that as a series goes along, it has that tendency to go a little darker.
I can relate to that because I have a romance in the works, and it certainly is a lot darker. Even though my paranormal horror says paranormal horror, there's lots of things, sunlight and hope and stuff involved. But this first the prologue, you're just like, oh my dear God. I
Yeah.
mean, it's well written, and I think people will find it compelling, but at the same time, it's much darker.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I'm not afraid of dark. I kind of, as long as the darkness is for a reason and it's crafted well, then I'm all for it. But then again, I am one of those unusual people that I read all genres, not just because of my show, but because I truly enjoy it all, for their uniqueness. But there are common threads no matter what you're crafting.
Absolutely.
Yeah, there has to be pacing. There has to be a sense of place and setting, and character growth and characters that you can identify with. And it was interesting. I don't have a lot of patience for new series or new characters. I almost need to jump in halfway, and I didn't know why that bothered me, because it doesn't bother me in my reading. And Lindsay Kay was teaching this class, and she said, I watched the American Horror Show, the Freak Show, and I thought I would totally like it, and I didn't. I lost interest, and I knew I lost interest too. And she said because she couldn't find one character that she honestly cared about, and I was like, she's so right. I hated it because I could not find one character that I actually cared about.
I think that's true, but I mean, have you read Gone Girl?
No, I have not.
Okay, have you seen the movie?
No.
No. Okay. Well, it was on the New York Times bestseller list for, I don't know, forever. And my editor mentioned it to me that might be an interesting read. So I thought, well, all right, she's telling me I should read it. So I did. And there's nobody really in that entire book that's likable. And I agree with Linda K. Silva that generally speaking, and I tell my students, you've got to have characters in there that the reader can care about. But Gillian Flynn wrote a book with these terrible, awful horror show people, and the writing was so fresh. I just loved that book.
Well, I think that's caring too. Like I even though it may sound like I'm looking for somebody that I identify with or admire, I'm looking for somebody that I care about, and that can be the villain, because
Yes.
the character has to be compelling, and and no matter how evil and awful they may be, if they're compelling, then I'll stick with it.
Well, if one of the things I think every writer has to do is, especially in a mystery novel, is, I mean, you have to understand what motivates. You really have to understand what motivates everything that happens in that book. You have to. And again, that's where we were talking about revisions. That's where revisions comes in. A lot of, certainly what I do is I go back and make my characters consistent with what I've learned about them over the period of time of 6 months that I've been writing a book. But I forgot what I was going to say. I'm tired. I've been writing this book, which I have to turn in 2 weeks. I'm losing my train of thought.
It's okay. I do, I'm not ashamed to admit there are often times where I start with this fantastic idea that I'm explaining, and then midstream my brain decides to change
Just to check out. I know. Like,
I'm just like,
really
oh dear
fun to be in
Jesus.
front of a crowd and have that happen.
Oh my goodness. Unfortunately, we have run out of time, but I find your books extremely compelling, and there's almost a historical element to it because it reminds me not necessarily of hard-boiled mysteries, but not a lot of books, even ones that are quite likable, really go into the kind of language and character development that you do, and it's just so like all these quirky unusual characters, and sometimes exposition or going into that kind of description can turn on the snooze button, whereas I felt enraptured with all the different characters. And
Thank you
so
so much. I appreciate that.
yeah, so I wanted to let you know that I really appreciate that, and I don't see it very often, and so I was glad to have the pleasure of reading your book.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
So thank you for coming on the show. Maybe I'll have you on again sometime.
Would love it. Anytime.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
Okay. Bye-bye.